Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Unveiling the Future, Applying AI in Treasury Management. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we consider how to solve prevailing challenges in Treasury by leveraging AI. Our speakers for today are Jess Scheer, Executive Editor at CMLI, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Jess and Craig, and I now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Great introduction. And Jess, it is good to be here with you on our second webinar with your organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if people are looking at the background, I'm in a hotel at the Windy City Conference. So stepped out and got back there. So it looks like we have good, solid, strong connection. So I'm excited about that. Also, everyone, thank you for spending some time in your afternoon or evening or late morning, depending on when you're located. We really appreciate you taking some time to discuss this topic. This is a really key topic for so many in Treasury and so many in finance. So it's really interesting. And there'll be information about the research that we did, which was underwritten by the Cash Management Leadership Institute, of which Jess is a leader in, and we'll invite you to download that report. Really, really good information. It's very interesting to see that information. But what are we going to cover today? We'll cover some of the terms: AI, Gen AI, machine learning. How are people using AI tools, some of the artificial intelligence tools? What are your views on it? How are they using it? What are some of the challenges that we see in Treasury that people would apply this type of technology to it? And so you can think of things like cash flow forecasting, very big area. And you can also understand that payment security fits into this model as well, that people are seeing challenges in addressing those. Most of those you're probably quite familiar with, but your peers, a significant percentage of your peers, are also looking to manage other risks, identify exposures, do functions like reconciliation in different areas. So those are challenges that are in Treasury and in broader areas of finance. And we'll touch on some of those topics, what that looks like. Then we'll look at AI use in Treasury, both current and planned. We'll look at the two sides briefly of what people are doing from a testing perspective and a use perspective in Treasury, but also some of the differences of what are people doing personally to play with things, play with AI tools, and what are they doing and using for work. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on how we can solve some of these issues with AI, how they can help reduce the pain level of fraud, the pain level of forecasting, the pain and challenges that we described a little bit earlier. And then at the end, Jess and I will cover 3 takeaways from the research and from our discussion. So we've got a lot to cover, but that's the flow for today. So I'm looking forward to just talking through that with you, Jess. So defining the terms, I'll start, and Jess, feel free to jump in as you see fit. If we start at the bottom left, machine learning, this is where we leverage the tools to detect patterns of language, patterns of numbers, to be able to make detect patterns and to extract from that. So sometimes forecasting information comes from that quite well. If it's seeing patterns or flows, it can manage that. It can help detect what's standard and what's anomalous. So if certain activities occur in a particular way, it detects those, identifies those as normal, and then it can detect something that's anomalous. So fraud detection is an example. Quality control can be another example of using machine learning to say what's normal and what's out of that standard. Artificial intelligence, we show that as a broader category of using machines or intelligent systems, however you'd like to describe those, that mimic or mirror human behavior, human thinking. And we say human behavior to perceive, reason, learn, and make decisions. And to the broader categories, things like natural language processing. Some of us have learned to code in different languages, but now with AI, all of us can code if we know, for the most part, if we know English and we can speak. You don't even have to type well. You can do, it can process our instructions via natural language, whether we type it, whether we speak it. We can even code by giving verbal instructions. So certainly the new cheat code is by being able to use our language and NLP. It certainly detects patterns, and can help with decision making and odds on. Now, so some of the categories are AI is the broad category. It branches into different parts. There's certainly a lot of good examples and great charts that show how technologists look at how AI, machine learning, generative AI, and quite a host of different descriptors are broken out. So we have AI at the top, broken out to machine learning, generative AI. You may be arguing with that in your head because you've heard other descriptions, but this is just how we're doing it for this point. We're not trying to be edgy or different. And this is the way that some people like to describe it. But on the generative AI side, we're looking at using machines to help create new content. And that's really quite interesting. Certainly in the use of language, if you use a search engine, you ask for something, it returns articles, and you have to hunt the articles. Generative AI, you can ask it to summarize things in 40 words or 2 paragraphs or highlight the key points. And so it takes that data, compiles it, figures out what makes sense, and creates new content, which can oftentimes be very useful. Sometimes it can create material and make statements of things that aren't so, but it allows us to rapidly create additional content. So that can be used even more broadly for things like fraud detection, more directed and more guided and more expansive than just machine learning alone. It can be used for portfolio management, automating new accounting functions, helping to do reconciliation, analyzing documents, like let's say your bank agreements, analyzing your contracts, engagement letters, notes, mutual NDAs. It can analyze documents for financial activity. So it can take this, summarize information, create new documents. So we've got AI that understands, mimics behavior, generative AI, which compiles it and creates some extension of that. And then we have machine learning, which is really extremely strong pattern detection. Jess, I know I said
Absolutely.
a lot there. I promise I'd let you get in there, but I think I sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
No, there's still oxygen down here in Atlanta.
Okay, good.
One of the things I just wanted to share is I'm a storyteller. I think in examples, and we've got fraud detection under both categories, both machine learning and generative AI. So I just wanted to share an example under each. So under fraud detection, one example might be if AI can identify situations where in a retail environment, for example, you might have days in which the share of sales that are coming in through credit card decline. If you find that it's the same clerk on those days, that's a red flag because it might suggest that someone is saying, oh, our credit card reader's down, please pay us in cash, which is a red flag for fraud, right? They could be pocketing some of that cash. Generative AI takes it to a whole different level, where it might be a situation in which someone is able to deep fake the voice of a CFO, going to AP or AR and saying, hey, I need to make this invoice. Here's my verbal acceptance. Please change this information so that we can pay this vendor right away, right? Sure sounds like the CFO, but fraudsters are using AI to take fraud to the next level. And we're in a situation where we need AI now to combat that. And that's where we migrate from machine learning to generative AI, where we can take it to that next level and make it a whole lot more sophisticated. At the conference Craig and I were just at, for example, there was a speaker who tried to create a fraud, and it took 12 seconds. He recorded her voice for 12 seconds and then used AI to leave a message that said, essentially, I'm giving permission to pay this invoice faster. Please make sure that this goes out quickly. sounded just like her. Even though she never said those words, they're able to take the sounds of her voice and mimic it. Imagine what someone can do when they're trying their darndest to become fraudsters, and how that technology is going to continue to evolve for the worse. You need AI to combat those.
I think you are a good storyteller. Some of the stories are scary, which is
To be sure.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit about what's going on the tech side, the development.
Sure. So what's really interesting is, I think we're at a point where people are excited by what technology can bring, but apprehensive at the same time. I think that's the duality we see right here, right? 77% say they're excited about the developments of new technology, but there's also a large group that are nervous about it. I think one of the things that's interesting in the research report, and we'll get to this, so I'm stealing our own thunder a little bit, Craig, but what we found is that in the cash forecasting space, for example, a third of all companies say that they're going to be using AI for cash forecasting within the next 12 months by 25. That number jumps to 2/3, from 1/3 to 2/3 of the survey participants within 1 more year by the end of 26, which means now folks are starting to look to see what tools are available out there, what their opportunities are, what their budget needs to be, what they need to do to prepare, et cetera. So we're at this really interesting inflection point, I think. There's certainly apprehension, there's certainly concern, but we're at this really, really interesting inflection point where early adopters are going to be laggards before too long.
That's a real key point. Early adopters are going to be laggards before too long, right? If you're not, the change is happening so quickly. Early adopter, if you sit and remain static, you'll become middle of the pack and you'll become a laggard. I think that's really interesting, especially the rate of speed that we're seeing this activity. So thank you everybody who takes our surveys. This is very helpful. Some of them are long, and everyone wants to know the next level of detail, and that requires fairly lengthy surveys. So we really appreciate it because we can, pull and see this type of data separated. And that brings us not to a survey, but to our first poll question. And the first poll question, hopefully it shows up on your screen, is a select all that apply. It's multiple choice. And the question is, for which of the following core functional requirements are you planning to invest in technology to address over the next year? And it covers reconciliation tools, cash forecasting, cash positioning, payment hub capabilities, the ability to send payments into different directions, financial risk management, any part of the financial risk management function, or none of the above. So go ahead and select that and hit submit. And then if in the chat box you type the letter CMLI, you can type poll too, but if you type CMLI for Cash Management Leadership Institute, if we get 150 people typing that, we'll send all the results of the poll questions out embedded in the document. And that will, I think you will all see them on today's webinar, but we'll include that in what gets sent out to you. So go ahead and type that in. And I think I said 150, and that means Brian will have to count all that up, which is personally enjoyable. All right, Jess, now you know how mean I am. The cash forecasting, as we talked about, that's number one. Payments sit at number 4. Recon tools, number 2 at 43. Financial risk at 37. This is a pretty strong showing for what people expect to use it. Your thoughts?
It's remarkable. I think there's 2 things to point out. First of all, I assume everyone read the question carefully. We're talking about what you're going to be doing over the next year, just over the next 12 months, Craig. We're not talking about what's your long-term horizon investment strategy over the next decade. We're talking about what are you going to invest in over the next 12 months? What are you starting to budget? What are you starting to think about? And honestly, I think this is one of the reasons why CMLI exists, to be honest. One of the things that we do is connect the folks that are looking to buy technology with that technology because we realize we're at this really interesting inflection point. So I think in the cash forecasting space, as I said, we were at a third when we did the survey. That was going to leap to 2/3 based on the survey results. I think we see indication that because that survey is now a couple months old, literally 60 days old, the adoption curve may be increasing. We also may be a little bit biased. I do a lot of benchmarking work, so I'm always looking for bias. And I think if folks are attending an AI webinar, they may be a little bit more of a leading buyer of technology. But still, I think what we're seeing is the majority of organizations are looking at cash forecasting tools. So that is a perfect example. We're going to go into more depth in that use case. Craig, anything else jump out at you?
No, I mean, yeah, I think there is a bias. People are showing up here more than because they're interested in artificial intelligence. But I am seeing every event. I've been to 2 conferences this week, and each of the conversations, there's more interest in it, and I think that's just what's happening, what we're seeing. And so, if anybody's tried ChatGPT 4.0 and engaged it in the multimodal way where you can talk to it and you hear it talk in an almost normal voice, it doesn't sound like a bot. It might freak you out a little bit, get you a little concerned, like this is really odd, this is quite good. And if you've seen some of the deep fakes with the videos, how good it is, and you can do that live. And it's really hard to tell you, like, well, the frame rate's different. That lady's hands look really thick, like a guy's hands. All those things are like very hard to tell now. And so, wait 2 weeks and we won't see that. So a lot of significant development. So yeah, thanks for your comments on that. And two, just the Cash Management Leadership Institute has a website. That information will be shared. They sponsor content like the research, and they have a conference coming up in 2025. Yeah, looking forward to that. So there'll be more information they can share with you about that. But we're excited about what they can do in that space for continuing good dialogue. So thanks for doing that. That brings us to the corporate use of AI tools, the distinction between using something personally and using for work. Jess, love to hear you comment on this. There's also there's a difference between what banks are doing, what corporations are doing too, but your thoughts.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to a Bank of America example, I promise. But let's talk about what we do personally. First of all, I'm holding up my phone. I don't know if you can see it. This has ruined all technology because we assume that all systems that we use in our workplace will be just as intuitive as our iPhones or other smartphone devices, right? So we're much more comfortable. We've become comfortable in using that technology in our personal space. And again, I'll just provide a couple quick examples. At the conference Craig and I were at this past week, I was sitting in the back of the room auditing some classes, and people had questions that the speakers didn't know the answers to. I happen to have the ChatGPT. It's a free app on my phone, plugged in their question, and was able to share that with the speakers in real time for them to share those answers. 4 or 5 seconds, right? It's an amazing tool. My wife is graduating with her ordination out of state. We're going to celebrate at a fancy restaurant. I have no idea what these restaurants are like out of state. I could Google it, but I know that most of those Google lists are sponsored. I could call the hotel and ask their recommendation, but I know they get kickbacks. I simply clicked into ChatGPT and asked, hey, what are the top-rated restaurants within a couple miles of this location? Within 5 seconds, I got the list of menus, recommendations, etc. Right? Use it more than Google in our personal lives. And I think we're increasingly going to start using it for work. I suspect this number is actually a little bit lower, and the reason I do is a lot of tools already have AI baked in, and so a lot of folks might not realize that they're using AI in their tools. So that number might realistically be a little bit higher. But there's also still some apprehension in the business world. There's some concern, for example, about I've heard some companies say in the workplace, be careful of the personal information that you include in a question, because the concern is that we don't know where that information is going to be stored, for example, right? So I think there will be some concern. I'm just looking at the questions that come in. Hopefully we'll have plenty of time at the end, but I think that's one of the reasons for this gap. But I suspect that use for work is going to be increasing significantly over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, thanks for that. One of the questions is, how concerned are people about the accuracy?
Yeah.
I think there's some aspects of generative AI on the text front where I forget the term. It's like a ghost, or someone can type what it is, and they're like, you ask a question and make something up that it's extrapolating, and it's wrong. It doesn't exist. And it did it very quickly. And so there's a sense of we just depend on what we hear. We certainly need to guide it, nurture it, and help it learn, and question the veracity, both in terms of numbers sometimes, but certainly on the text front, there's certainly some cases where it's aired quite heavily and people have just blindly believed it. I would say a month or so ago, hallucinations, that's it. Thank you. I don't know why I can't remember that. Just make stuff up and you're like, that's not right.
Yeah.
And people have submitted it like, hey, it came from a computer, it must be right. It's like, no, it's, in some senses, it's like an extremely quick intern, just way better than an intern. But you still have to check an intern's work, and I think there's some validation in how we use that for things that we rely on for business, whether it's text oriented, analytic oriented. It makes a lot of sense to do that. So, yeah, it's really interesting. Well, let's continue. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to pat you on the back for a second. So one of the things that I did with ChatGPT is I asked, who are the top thought leaders in the treasury management space, right? That's not something you can Google. You'll get a bunch of white papers and lists. Some guy named Craig Jeffery popped up on that list. So
you run a chat strategic treasure, and that's what happened.
But the other thing I would suggest, and this isn't a session on how to improve AI results, but one quick best practice is to give the ChatGPT or whatever AI tool you're using the database of data that you're working from, and say, within this database, give me X, here's my question, and it can pull the results in real time. That way you can combat some of those hallucinations.
Yeah, that's excellent. So what are some of the challenges facing Treasury? You know what they are. You live through them. You're in this space. I love this quote. It's essentially half, 46% of those that have responded to our Treasury Perspective survey. We have a new one for 2024 out. I can't share that information yet. We haven't released it, but here, 46% of respondents say we have responsibilities we don't have time to perform. Treasury groups tend to be thinly staffed. They have more tasks added to their plate or their jobs list every year. And this is pretty common. So just about half experience this. And then we ask, what are those responsibilities that you don't have time to perform? Cash forecasting is number one, 38% of those. So 38% of 46%. So roughly, 17, 18% of companies say this is an area. Now, cash forecasting shows up. This is one of the most important areas. We don't do it enough. We want it to be more accurate. We spend the most amount of time on it. We would spend more time on it. We plan to invest in it. So I don't know how many that was. That was 8. I don't know if you call that knock factor or whatever it is, but it's really a key area. And so since that's a good intersection of AI capabilities, I think we need to keep our eyes on this. This is also an area where a number of the technology providers are adding functionality in there that's getting pretty good. Some of them are pretty good already. The other two areas, financial risk management, exposure management, this has become more significant from a counterparty risk, from FX, what are our exposures? How can we best manage those? And the unrelenting nature of the criminals who try to defraud everyone out of money all the time or steal data constantly. These are some of the responsibilities that people don't have the time to do. Now think about how important each of those are. Cash forecasting. How do I make sure I have enough money know that my liquidity exists. Financial risk management, which can have a very deleterious effect on my income or cash flow. And then fraud monitoring. I sure wish we had more help. Those are big items, Jess.
Those are huge. And what I love about those questions is it's based around the idea of what don't I have time to do today? So folks that are worried that AI is going to automate them out of a job don't have to worry, right? I think what AI will do is supplement what you're able to do so that you're able to tackle these big hairy problems, number one. Number two, AI is the perfect tool to address all three of these, right? If you think about what AI can provide, we've talked about cash forecasting. We're going to go into that use case next, stealing our own thunder a bit. But these are all tools. These are all problems that AI is a perfect tool to address, right? From risk management issues to fraud monitoring to identification and mitigation. If AI didn't exist, we would create something like AI to address something like this. So it's helpful that these are the things that are popping up to the top because they're the perfect problems for AI to address.
Yeah, excellent. So the next area, uses of AI in Treasury. We'll pick up the pace just a slight bit to stay on track. What are corporations planning to do, and what are they using, and what do they plan to use AI for in the future? I just want to mention a couple things. So you see the blue is what's currently in use, 8 and 9%. Number one, automated cash flow forecasting is a standalone, a key area, focus of Treasury. Number 2 and 3, fraud detection and prevention, smart payment and settlement processing. Those two are payment related. Two big items. Obviously, the fraud detection and prevention is more significant than smart payment, how it handles settlements. But take a look at that. Use in 1 to 2 years, use in 1 year. Automated cash flow forecasting, we're up well over 60% there. And we're right at about, let's see, 39, 40, 47% for fraud detection. So pretty significant items here that your peers are actively using or plan to use.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting, we've all seen the adoption curve, right? It's a typical bell curve with early adopters on one side and laggards on the other. And I think what's fascinating is right now we're at the point where the innovators are those that are using AI now, but within 12 months we're going to be early adopters and early majority to late majority, really within a year or two, right? So if you're not thinking about it now, if you're not on webinars like this now, thinking about what AI can do for you, you're going to be behind the curve, right? And there are significant risks that can be mitigated as a result of AI.
Yeah, excellent. So this brings us to our second poll question. It's a select all that apply or multiple choice. What are your concerns? Which of the following risk areas are you highly concerned about? Identifying your exposures, calibrating or seeing how heavy they are, right? What's the level of risk of that particular exposure? Addressing your exposures such as hedging or doing a spot trade, for example, or getting rid of those, reporting and managing your exposures, or none of the above. And go ahead and select all that apply and hit enter. We need 20, I can't even keep track of it. I think we need about 22. I've seen about 6 or 7 come in. So once we have that many CMLIs come in, we'll be good and share all those results. I don't want to talk about these items in particular and influence the voting, but just one note, why do we put 22 May in brackets? We capture this information. We put it in our knowledge base to continue to capture data on real surveys as well as poll questions to try to gauge and see how thoughts change over time. So that helps us keep track of it. So now you got a little bit of wisdom into why are they putting that there. So that's the deal. All right, Jess, your quick summary of this. Yeah.
Identifying your exposures is identified by 2 out of 3 respondents is 1 to be expected, but 2, it blows me away. I think identifying, addressing your exposures, and reporting and managing are all areas that the majority of our attendees today are thinking about. Be interested to see when you ask this question in a few months, whether that calibrating your exposures changes a bit. But the fact that folks are really seeing these ideas as challenges that they need to address and that they're highly concerned about, I think will go a long, long way.
Yeah, and I guess if we explored it in more detail, like calibrating your exposures, okay, I have exposure to this financial counterparty. Let's say if I could also pull in, sentiment analysis, what's going on with news or chat or, Twitter things, would that influence it at all? Or we focus more on the analytics of the data? So real good information there. Thanks so much for responding to each of those, and thanks for your comments, Jess. Jess, why don't you kick us off, and I'll jump in afterwards.
Sure. I think when we're talking about generative AI, the thing I would point out here is look at the first 3 results. The 3 highest are all about risk mitigation, right? No surprise. That's what we just saw in the last poll question, Greg. I think folks realize that AI is brilliant at pattern recognition, right? We may see a list of data and our gut says there's something uncomfortable about this. We're not sure what it is. AI can identify it in a snap, right? So when we're dealing with what folks are expecting generative AI to be able to do, risk mitigation is at the top of the list.
Yeah, good comments. The amount that people are using it for and want to use it, expect to use it for risk management, I think it makes sense. We've seen a number of tools, solution providers have things that go into the ERP to identify exposures of commodities or of foreign exchange, trying to pull that out as quickly as possible so that now I can see everything. I have good information. I have accurate information that's complete. Now I can make some decisions and leveraging tools. And so we see this as well. The first priority, the first principle is identify risk and evaluate those exposures. We see that here in the responses there. Evaluating and recommending the options might be nicely enhanced by AI, but I think there's a longer discipline for that. So maybe not as high on the list or as important compared to others. So really fun to see that.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add is just based on the number of attendees at certain sessions at the IOFM conference that Greg and I were just at this past week, bottom line is anything dealing with fraud is attracting massive numbers of folks, right? So it is the fear out there.
And sessions on fraud and AI, that blows everything up. Yeah. Now, some of you love this chart. Some of you may be tired of seeing charts like this that we've had in place. We've seen them like for 35 years. We spend little time on the strategic, all time on operational. We want to flip that, make it so that we're spending and using our brain power to think strategically, to act tactically, and spend less time on operational activity. This is, inverting that activity and that status quo takes automation. It takes leveraging technology. And the other thing that pushes this, very different from just AI, but the fact that the Zoomers, they don't want to do operational activities that are being automated at other companies. They think it's stupid, it's suboptimal, whatever term you want. Others may say you're being lazy, but are they being lazy? I think they're being pretty rational. Why are we digging a hole for to build a house with a shovel when there's tools out there that can scoop it out? Why would we do that? And I think that's a really good question. And so I think that there's pressure because we have to become more efficient over time. But in addition to that logical aspect, there's also the age cohort issue where, the Zoomers who are now moving into manage, supervisory and manager roles aren't doing those and are pushing our companies to do better there. I think that's pretty encouraging to help move towards the more strategic inverted image on the right, Jess.
Absolutely. The only thing I would add to that is think about who you're hiring next. You're not looking for folks that can key in invoices faster than your last hire. You're looking for folks that can think about what the results of that data means, right? So it's an opportunity to change the mix of your talent over time.
I like that. Not hiring people to key things in faster. Awesome. And get carpal tunnel syndrome. So we are on our final poll question. It's a double stack poll question. Top one is, my view on artificial intelligence is that there is much promise, much hype, some promise, some hype. I know those are not exactly continuing, but pick the best response from those. The second one is related to other topics for webinars. What would you like to hear about? You could select all of them, you could select some of them. Of course, if you select none of the above, that'd be the only one you select. But go ahead and select those. After you're done, go ahead and hit submit. We have enough responses of people in the chat box. Thank you for doing that. We're well over the 150. I probably should have said 250, but that's a lot for Brian to count.
He's only got 10 fingers.
Yeah. I hope he's not using his fingers. He's probably using AI. And he's just pretending he's working hard on it. Like, oh yeah, it's got an auto count thing. Actually, I wonder if they do. Well, let's get down to the data, and I'll stop the silly talk. Yeah.
So I wonder if we asked this question before the webinar began, if these numbers would be slightly different.
Oh, they would, yeah.
Because I think we've made the case, and we'll continue to make the case for why AI has tremendous promise. As to future topics, my role, I'm the content guy at CMLI, which means that I'm going to dig into question number 2 in far more detail, because not only does it feed which webinars Craig wants to lead over the next period of time, but it tells me what this audience wants and what we can deliver more of. So use cases, generative AI, and treasury and finance, fraud and control topics. If the majority of you want it, that's what we can deliver.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, thanks everybody for responding to all of the poll questions we had. We're in our final stretch. Had to rework this particular chart, and I'll explain it if that works for everybody. The cash flow forecasting is how do we forecast? And the reason we show this chart is because as you look at different time domains, where you get the information for a forecast can differ. For Treasury, it's very easy to do a forecast across AP, AR, and Treasury, just using Treasury data from banks, and say, well, let's do some kind of rolling average, moving average. Last month may mirror this month, and the fact, to the extent that you have seasonality or process changes, your numbers will lag. But generally, where do people find information for forecast? Follow this pattern, and this is all a setup for why using AI will help collect and leverage that data and see where you draw those lines. For AP, and this can vary from company to company, but usually AP has pretty good information as you go out about 15 days, 20 days. They have the information and it's approved and payments are scheduled. And so AP data can be some of the best information out 2 weeks to maybe 3 weeks. As you get beyond that, Treasury estimates oftentimes are better. Farther than that, once you get mid-year beyond, sometimes using FP&A, what the budget is, and which allows what people to spend, sometimes that can be a better source, the plans for that, even though that's a income statement orientation. It works pretty well. Accounts receivable, and this can vary. Sometimes AR is really good, only out 5 or 6 days. Other times it's good out 40 days, depending on what the DSO is and how the organization flows. But usually AR data is pretty good. Let's say out more than a month, and then you move to Treasury estimates and then FP&A. On the Treasury side, Treasury is great looking at banking information, the debt that you use, Treasury data that might sit in the Treasury system. And then as you go out past a certain period of time, your use of capital is going to come from your from what you're planning to do with the debt and the capital markets to provide and support for, your organization. What do we need to look like to support the business's objectives, over the next 2 to 5 years? Okay, we're going to need an extra 100 million of capital. It needs to, be 70% debt, 30% equity. But this chart here is showing that those items can move, and now you're pulling data from different data sources for different time domains. This is way more difficult than just let's have a spreadsheet and model a smoothing or rolling average. I will say one thing that was interesting. I'm at the Windy City conference. Well, I'll head back there after this. But one of the vendors that does forecasting had some models of, they didn't show it this way, but they're like, hey, this is where we pull this from the AP system for this long, and then we use another model, and then we can plug in our own stuff. And they had something that captured this type of concept in the system. And I was like, that's what leading forecasting companies do. And it's not easy. And you don't have time to do it. Most companies don't have the resources to do it. So it's a very small number of companies that have done it. And this would change over time. Jess, I have, I'll give you the floor if there's anything else you wanted to comment on this slide before we jump on, if there was.
Now, why don't we jump to the next slide, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions at the end.
Yep.
From a fraud prevention perspective, I think one, let me scare you, and then two, I'll tell you what we can do about it. And I'll try to do it in 2 minutes. The number of frauds and the size of frauds are increasing. If you Google or type into ChatGPT recent financial frauds, you'll see that the Justice Department really recently got a 5-year prison sentence for an employee who stole $5 million from Facebook. How? Creating fake vendors, creating fake invoices, and then getting kickbacks from the fake invoices and payments that were going to friends and family, right? We're not just talking about small checks of $100 here and $200 there that are getting faked. We're talking about big, massive frauds that are happening. And they're doing so because they think they can get away with it because they're increasingly sophisticated. AI is the perfect tool to address this and to mitigate this, right? So we're dealing with issues where, thank you, Allison, where there are fake IDs that folks are able to identify through AI, forgery detections, right? We may see an invoice that looks exactly like we think it should. AI tools are perfect at identifying what might be a very subtle difference, a subtle misspelling, a subtle change in account information that they're dealing with. And then there's bank activity. I promised the Bank of America story. So their credit card division uses AI to make sure that there aren't any anomalies. So if you use your credit card for a larger amount than they anticipate, or using it more often than you usually use it for, or anybody that ever travels, you'll get a notification if you're in a different city than you typically use your credit card in, you'll get a notification right away. That's not a clerk sitting being big brotherish. That's an AI bot that is tracking this and making sure that there's identification and mitigation techniques built in real time.
Yeah, excellent. It's not a clerk being big brotherish. It's just an AI bot being big brotherish, tracking it for, and keeping the cost down for us. Yeah, and just stepping lightly to the risk management life cycle. I think it's worth spending just a few moments on this, and you'll get a copy of this. So don't worry if that I didn't go through it in massive detail. But if we look at, from left to right, one is, what's my overall view, my risk capacity, appetite, and tolerance. Where is that all the way to how do I identify my exposures, and how do I stack rank them in terms of this one is 100, this one's 100, but the first 100 is 3 times as risky as the other one, so I give that a score of 300 to 100. How do I risk analyze that, whether it's counterparty or FX exposures? How do I prioritize that? What is at the level that I need to act on? what's approaching the level that I need to monitor it more closely. And then we move to pre-trade analytics. Once I know what needs to be managed, how do I make the best trades or take the best course of action to reduce the level of exposure down to the level that I'm comfortable maintaining, and then executing those, and then following up with reporting and analytics across a number of different domains, some of which I mentioned. Where is some AI opportunity? It might be some on the capacity and tolerances. Review our financial statements, see what may exist there, and what our potential size might be compared to others. There's some AI opportunity there, but the other 4 sections, we believe there's a lot more opportunity to leverage the data, to gather this, order them, and show what you need to pay attention to. Because as a tool, AI doesn't just run on its own. It needs human interaction to see if what's been provided is right, to validate it, to move forward. And so things like risk identification, calibration of those exposures, what's on the warning track that we need to, hey, we're going to need to start paying attention to our exposure to this currency or to this commodity, because the price volatility is getting to the point where now it becomes material for our business, all the way to optimizing the trades that we may take. What's the most affordable way to do it? Or to write great reports for us, or to draft a great report for us that we just modify slightly. This is just another area where AI could help in this cycle. I expect to see quite a bit more of this over time. And so, Jess, I think, why don't you take 1 and 3? I'll take 2 as planned.
Sounds good. And I'm going to consolidate 1 and 3 just for the sake of time. Bottom line is we're at an inflection point, right? We're at a point where AI is going to become more and more common. We're already seeing it being used for cash forecasting in the next 12 months. And I think the forecasts that we have are probably understating the results. That's the premium versus discount adoption rate, right? I think it's likely that things are going to proceed faster than we're anticipating even at this point. Craig, from a fraud mitigation perspective, are you anticipating the same thing?
Yeah, I certainly think so, because the criminals are using it to add to the attack methods. They do enhance what they're doing to expand the power. And the only way we can truly combat that is, if we talk about people, processes, technology, structure, well, we're going to need technology to help that too. We're not going to be able to do it alone. And so the natural escalation of this war will require us to use some of the tools to address those. So those are all key points. Jess, it has been fun talking with you, covering these points. I feel like we should do another one soon. But thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening, for paying attention. We have you'll all get the results or the document here, and Brian Weeks has a few things to share with you. Thanks everybody. Thanks Jess and Brian.
Indeed, thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And be sure to download the Generative AI in Treasury and Finance Survey Report by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.